How does one identify a witch? Well, one doesn't, because witches don't exist, you dum-dum. But boy, were we on the fence about that until recently. The most well-known legal proceedings seeking to identify witches were, of course, the Salem witch trials, which took place in Massachusetts in the 1690s. The trials ended in the deaths of 20 innocent people accused of witchcraft and the vilification of over 200 others. Pretty small fry, all things considered. Throughout the early modern period, about 110,000 people were tried for and 60,000 executed for the crime of witchcraft. Accusations often described a person communing with Satan, or hurting someone with magic, which of course was an ability bestowed upon ye by Satan. On average, these claims hit women much harder than men. If we take New England as an example, the group most often convicted of witchcraft were 80% women and usually above the age of 40. Also, the accused were often from the less well-to-do end of the social ladder. Obviously, people in that category were more vulnerable already, but the clergy didn't exactly set the board up in favor of women when they determined that the fragile feminine sex, feebler in both body and mind, was particularly prone to seduction by the devil. Some historians, looking at the witch hunts through a more sociological lens, have argued that the reason why women were so often both the accusers and the accused was because of how aggression would have manifested itself in an intensely patriarchal society. Basically, women had a very limited arsenal of ways they could show you they were pissed. A Puritan girl might not punch you in the face, but she could shout and curse and make up rumors, and if you happen to get sick around that same time, well, it's pyre o'clock for at least one of you. The accusations that kicked off the Salem witch trials came from two girls aged 11 and 9 who were allegedly experiencing shaking fits. With no knowledge of the host of illnesses that fit the description, they suspected witchcraft. And, wanting to protect their humble, pure town, they decided to take action by accusing their slave. Preteens, am I right? The history of witch hunts goes back much further than that, though. Here's an account of magical initiation from the 2nd century CE. An infant, cased in dough to deceive the unsuspecting, is placed beside the person to be initiated. The novice is thereupon induced to inflict what seem to be harmless blows upon the dough, and ultimately the infant is killed. Lots of blood. And over the victim they make league and covenant, and by complicity in guilt pledge themselves to mutual silence. Such sacred rites are more foul than any sacrilege. Yeah, they sure are. They're also stupid as hell. This is so convoluted it makes me nostalgic for she threw it back with Satan, but it really wasn't uncommon for accusations to be weirdly creative and somewhat shaky. We already discussed how interpersonal conflict could lead to a trial, but persecution could really make them mutate. In a socio-pragmatic analysis of examination transcripts from the Salem witchcraft trials, Dawn Archer reviews the word choice of persecutors. She reveals that, in most cases, judges worked off the assumption that the accused was a witch from the get-go. A lot of guilty but unwilling to confess. Torture was the natural next step. The brutality of witch trials, both those in Salem and Europe long before, is notorious. The Cornell University's witchcraft collection offers some valuable insight. Aren't you glad that this Ivy League school can afford a passionate graphic designer? Torture methods included flogging, binding, stretching, the use of thumb screws, a thing called strappado, which actually sounds kind of fun. Never mind. Obviously, the torturers had a crime in mind, and they wouldn't stop until you said what they wanted you to. Often, torture would only come to a close after you gave them a list of co-conspirators who also needed torturing. A real industry life hack? So, conflict, ricocheting accusations, statements dreamed up through torture, and misogyny is what caused the witch hunts. Or did they? Because as much as we've established a pattern, there are a lot of deviations. In Witch Hunts in Europe and America, an encyclopedia, William E. Burns writes, "The similarity of ideas about witches across Europe and European colonies does not obscure many fascinating differences across both space and time. Why did the Inquisitions of Rome, Spain, and Portugal virtually ignore witches through vast swaths of the territories under their jurisdiction? How different was England from the continent continent, and even from Scotland. What made those few areas where men compromised the majority of witch hunt victims so different from the mainstream? Burns concludes that more collective traumas are to blame. The Reformation and the wars of religion sharply bringing heresy to people's minds. The drive on the part of the European elites to purify the culture of the common people. The colonial struggle to erase Native American religion. Spikes in desperate, cruel elitism. Some of these are even plausible for Salem. Apparently, there was a struggle for control going on just behind the scenes, between two major families of the town, a congregation divided. Obviously, none of this is a valid explanation for randomly endangering a kidnapped, enslaved woman and the hundreds of community members who followed, but a high-strung society plagued by distrust would certainly be more receptive to these charges. And it only took 48,000 dead women for the world to realize they were probably BS. Oh, those pre-Enlightenment social trends, they sure did bring us down. Between this and the Great Chain of Being, we lost some interesting world building. It's better this way. Can you imagine a fabricated moral panic sweeping a nation like this? Because you will. That's right. We're still going. In the 1960s, the Satanic Panic took the US by storm. Various developments in immigration and religious diversity, coupled with some hard hitters in pop culture, might have led to over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritual abuse, including, but not limited to, ritual cannibalism and child sacrifice. And they probably didn't even involve pranking each other with bakery switcheroos. One fascinating example is the loosely related nerd persecution of tabletop roleplay in the 70s. Dungeons and Dragons, or for the common layperson, that thing they played in Stranger Things, is the perfect crossbreed between board games and yapping. Sit around with fellow pasty enthusiasts for an average of 4 hours a session, gambling on whether you can get a reptile to want you carnally. Wizards of the Coast should make me their salesperson for real. This is not a bid, by the way. I actually had my dice sets in my backpack. But let's take it from the top. It all began with the Cold War. Journalist Francis Wheen described the flavor of the 1970s as a pungent melange of apocalyptic dread and conspiratorial fever, which is my nickname in university. The Cold War had given rise to the concept of brainwashing, the idea that it was possible to forcibly reprogram someone's personality. The term was first coined by Edward Hunter, a CIA operative who noted that a few Americans returning from the Korean War appeared to have genuinely become advocates of communism. It was picked up by the media and introduced to the public. And, with the aforementioned spreading of religious diversity, America's perception of D&D developed as cult-like. Which, I'll admit, sounds kind of rad. Join my cult and fail to climb small imaginary obstacles almost bi-weekly. Though it must have been a lot less rad for the family of the 16-year-old James Egbert, who disappeared from Michigan State University in 1979. His family hired private detective William Deere to locate the missing student. Deere homed in on Egbert's interest in D&D and constructed a highly imaginative scenario in which Eggbert had become the victim of his own fantasy world. Apparently, James was under intense academic pressure, gay, in the 70s, suffering from epilepsy, doing drugs, and dealing with intense personal issues that culminated in multiple suicide attempts. All of which Deere ignored, concluding that Eggbert might actually have begun to live this game, not just play it. Dungeons and Dragons could have absorbed him so much that his mind had slipped through the fragile barrier between reality and fantasy, and he no longer existed in the world we inhabit. Capitalizing on decades worth of anxieties about young people being kidnapped and brainwashed by cults, Detective This Kid LARPed Too Close to the Sun and Went Crazy named his own memoirs The Dungeon Master, in which Deere cast himself as a compassionate hero on a quest to save a vulnerable child genius. You can't make this stuff up. Deere's lies became more outlandish, including a story in which he personally fought armed cult members throughout his career, and were challenged by James Egbert's family, but not before the media had its way with the story. Over the years, multiple cases of young people struggling socially and mentally famously were used as sticks to beat their obscure hobbies with in times of unrest. It's difficult to link all this directly to any one witch hunt. These moral panics are just too different in scale, in origin, in ultimate death toll, though it's probably not an exaggeration to say that the hysteria over Dungeons and Dragons cost lives. After all, any child suspected of being brainwashed by a spiritually ominous game master probably didn't receive the kind of attention they actually needed, like James Egbert himself, who became a victim of suicide in 1980. As much as we like to think of history as a line, ever progressing, it seems to bend into circles all too often. Collective trauma and paranoia can tear communities apart, and the people who were at the margins of those communities will fall down the cracks. The original draft of this video made it a lot easier to plug merch. Have you ever engaged in a moral panic? Tell us in the comments. Give me a dexterity check for smashing that like button.